Seeing none, we have a little housekeeping. Within your folder are the minutes from the January 10th, 12th, and 17th meetings. I hope you've all had an opportunity to read through those, and I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes. Representative Stockstill? Is there a second? A second. Representative Howerton, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Thank you. We have a special treat this morning, an informational briefing from Don Bueller with the Kansas Water Authority. I don't have a further introduction for you. I'm assuming you can take most of our hour and a half telling us about your operations there.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. Thank you to the committee. I'll try my best, but you all will probably have a lot of questions. I'm here to represent the volunteer and advisory arm of the Kansas Water Office and the planning process. So I represent regional advisory committees and the Kansas Water Authority, which we're going to share information today about our involvement in the water planning process. I think of us as the grassroots, boots on the ground. Our regional advisory committee members and our water authority members, they live in our communities and they work in water or water impacts their life in some way. And they donate their time and their talents to try and further water issues. So thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. So we're going to get started. I can just use the computer. Okay, all right, great. So the first thing I'm going to give you a little bit of information about is the Kansas Water Authority and how it was established. It was established in 1981. It's statutorily within and a part of the Kansas Water Office. And our job is to pretty much advise the governor and the legislature on water policy issues, which we'll talk about that when we look at the annual report. Our job is also to approve the state water plan, which we just did in August. And we also are charged with putting together a budget for the state water plan fund that is submitted every year. We also approve federal contracts for the reservoirs for water storage, among other things. So this is the makeup of the Kansas Water Authority. Our members are across the state, and they are representative of different water interests. And on the next page, I'll show that to you. But let me tell you about the breakdown of the Kansas Water Authority. So there are 24 members. So when we have a meeting, there's 24 of us sitting around the table. But there are 13 voting members. And so the voting members are shown on this map here and are appointed by the governor based upon what they represent. The other 11 members of the Water Authority are ex officios. They're not a voting member, but they're a very important part of the Water Authority. They are the head of, many of them are the secretary of their agency that touches on water. And their job is to make sure that we have all of the information that we need to make decisions and to make recommendations. And so we're really, the great part of the Water Authority is having the talent of the state employees and the state leaders to help us make those decisions. This is the breakdown of the Kansas Water Authority. I was appointed by Governor Kelly. You can look down through the list. Randy Hazlett was appointed by the President of the Senate, Mike Armstrong, Speaker of the House, and then all of the other ones on the list, what happens is they submit 3 names to the governor, and then the governor appoints one of them. And so they represent many water groups throughout the state. There's a large and small municipal water users. There's 2 people that represent the public, State Association of Kansas Watersheds, conservation districts, 2 that represent groundwater management districts, industry and commerce, and conservation and environment. So it's a pretty broad group of a lot of different talents, and I think it really helps to bring all of the different issues together. This is the list of the ex officios that I was telling you about that represent all of the different agencies. And these folks, again, are the ones that provide us with all of the important information that we need to make decisions. So within the Water Authority, we've created subcommittees, and these subcommittees have things that they work on. So the Budget Committee, this is the committee that looks at the budget recommendations and develops those with input from the regional advisory committees. So the regional advisory committees go through and look at their projects and their local areas and elevate those to the Water Authority so that we can make recommendations to put those in the budget. There is a Public Water Supply Committee. I got to serve on this for a very short time. What a talented group of people working on our water marketing program. They set the rates and they work with all the different cities or counties that have water storage that they use out of our reservoirs. Before I was appointed to the Water Authority, I don't think I truly understood how important this piece was. I live south of Eudora. I get my water from Douglas County Rural Water District number 4. They have a marketing contract with Clinton Reservoir to get water to pump it to my house. Didn't know that. It's a interesting system, but it's an important part of the work of the Kansas Water Office is this water marketing. Then the last committee is the RAC operations. So RAC stands for the Regional Advisory Committees. And these are those groups of folks that I was telling you about. They're in all the communities. I'm going to talk about this here in a little bit, but we have 6 Water Authority members that before they came to the Water Authority, they were on regional advisory committees, including myself. I was on the Kansas Regional Advisory Committee for about 4 or 5 years. It's some of the best work that I feel I've done to highlight and elevate issues in my watershed. So the Regional Advisory Committees, they were established in 2014. Their role is to advise the Kansas Water Office and the Kansas Water Authority on water-related issues and problems, things that are going on in their area. How can they elevate those? And they're to advise us on all kinds of different issues happening in their communities, and they create goals and action plans. And I tell you, one of the best feelings is when one of your goals and action plans, you can put a little check next to it. And we've been able to do a few of those when I was on the Kansas Regional Advisory Committee. So it's an important role, an important grassroots planning process. These are the Regional Advisory Committee planning areas. So you'll see that the ones on the eastern side of the state, they are based upon watersheds. And the ones on the left side, on the western side of the state, those are more built around groundwater management districts and how those are broken up over there. So these are the areas, and some of them are, you can see some of them are really big. And so they'll have, I think it's like 14 people on the Regional Advisory Committee, and they represent all different issues as well. You'll find that they have people who represent agriculture, represent municipal, represent recreation, if that's something in their area. Not all of them represent that, but there are some main areas that they represent. So they are a volunteer position, 4-year terms. The chairs are appointed by the Water Authority chair. Their membership is approved by the Water Authority. Their core categories, these are the ones I was talking about: agriculture, at-large public, conservation and environment, industry and commerce, and public water supply. And then they can include these others. And so it really depends on their part of the state and where they need some representation on the Regional Advisory Committee. For the Kansas Regional Advisory Committee, we have a spot for recreation. Well, that's because there's a lot of recreation going on with the reservoirs and the rivers in that part of the state. But in other parts of the state, they don't have that. They might have fish and wildlife or surface water irrigation, water assurance districts. So they have the opportunity to add members to represent those other categories. So this will give you an idea of the state water planning process. The issues are identified by the public, the Regional Advisory Committee, the agencies and other partners. Then the Water Office is charged with working on the draft development of the Kansas Water Plan. This is a huge process, and I just want to say, they just finished, we approved it in August. They create this document while they still do their regular job on top of it. It is such a heavy lift, and they do such a wonderful job. It was a great product. We now have our water plan to guide us on our next steps. There was a public input and hearing process that happened. I understand there were some really thoughtful and great comments that came through the public process that were considered and changes made to the water plan. Then the Water Authority approved the Kansas Water Plan, and then we advised the governor, the legislature, and other decision makers on our water plan issues and priorities. So that's the path that we've been on, and we just approved that document. So now I'm going to turn to the annual report. Do you all have one in front of you? So this is the annual report to the governor and the legislature from the Kansas Water Authority. We had to approve this document, but the Kansas Water Office staff put together this document. So this is, it includes our water plan recommendations, and we're going to go through this a little bit. The performance-based budget information, updates on the state water plan projects and initiatives, and state water issues. You can also find this online. So I'm going to take a few minutes and go through this report. I think it's really important. It'll provide lots of information, kind of keep it handy if you want to talk about projects. So on the very first page, you'll see that slide of the Water Authority members, just like we showed on the slide a little bit ago, and a list of the ex officio members, a little bit about the Water Authority. So if you want to come back and maybe look to see which Water Authority is closest to your district or your part of the state. So let's go to page 3. So one of the things that we're supposed to do, according to the statute, is to make recommendations to the governor and the legislature on water policy issues. So one of the things that we did is we hosted a water policy conversation after House Bill 2686. After it went through the process, it was like, well, there was a lot there that people were interested in talking about, and there's so much energy around water right now. Why don't we host a water policy conversation? And it was simply that, a conversation. We wanted to learn, what are people interested in? What rises to the top, right? If we're going to have a conversation about water, what are the things that we really want to make progress on? And so in that meeting, we invited Water Authority members, we invited local stakeholders, and we brought everyone into a room and we asked a bunch of questions, and what rose to the top was 2 things: the Ogallala and funding. So we went to our next Water Authority meeting in August, and we were approving the state water plan, and we had a very heartfelt discussion about the Ogallala Aquifer. And our committee unanimously decided that they wanted to sustain the aquifer. And so we created an Ogallala committee that met in late November and drafted a statement to the governor and the legislature, because frankly, our job is to elevate issues to the governor and the legislature. So this is what we're hearing. We're hearing it from our regional advisory committees. We're hearing it from the Water Authority. We're hearing it from the stakeholders and our partners and our agencies. We're hearing it from everyone that this is the highest issue. And so we put it into our report. So if you'll look on page 3, I'm sorry? Does anyone need a copy of the report? Victoria has copies. I want to make sure you can see what we're looking at. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you, Victoria. Okay, we're looking at page 3. This is the Water Authority's recommendations for state policy. And the very first one is the one that I was just referring to, the critical depletion of the Ogallala Aquifer. And this is the Water Authority Subcommittee put together this recommendation, brought it to the full Water Authority. So our recommendation, you can read it there. The policy of planned depletion of the Ogallala Aquifer is no longer in the best interest of the state of Kansas. We went on to say a formal collaborative process is needed to establish data-driven goals, metrics, and actions to halt the decline of the Ogallala Aquifer while promoting flexible and innovative management within a time frame that achieves agricultural productivity, thriving economies, and vibrant communities now and for future generations of Kansans. The collaborative process should engage state agencies, regional advisory committees, local stakeholders, groundwater management districts, and the Kansas Water Authority, basically everyone. It's an inclusive process that we are recommending. This is a recommendation, and then I look at it this way too. We're aspiring to this. This is like saying, if we could look ways down the road, where would we like to be? This is where we'd like to be. Do we know how to get there? Not really. So there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of conversation to have, but our water authority really felt strongly to make a recommendation to the governor and the legislature. The second piece here is state appropriation for leveraging matching funds. We just want to highlight this, that we need leveraging matching funds to get some of those federal dollars that are coming from the federal government. If you flip to page 4, we've had for a long time been at the State House, some people much longer than me, advocating for the full statutory funding of the $8 million into the state water plan. That was an effort to get the statutory number put back into the state water plan, but it doesn't fund the entire state water plan. If you were to take that entire document and implement it, it's going to cost us $69 million per year. So that's what's on page 4. And we've been asked over and over, what's that number look like? And so this is their estimate. This number, it came from our state agencies. They put together the number that they think they would need to take care of the full implementation of the state water plan. So I wanted to make it clear that that's what this number is. It's the estimate for what we're going to need to implement the document that we just approved in August. So if you go on through the report, you can see the state water plan recommendations. We are asking for the full statutory $8 million funding into the state water plan. I'd like to go on to page 9. So page 9 is the section on Ogallala Aquifer initiatives. So I really like how the Water Office broke down the annual report this year, because you can see what kind of programs help you to meet those goals. And so if we're talking about the Ogallala Aquifer, very first thing at the top is water conservation areas. Those are a tool that individual landowners can use to help conserve water. And then there's local enhanced management areas. You've probably heard people say the acronym LEMA. Earl was up here last week talking about the LEMA as a tool for conservation. And so if you continue to go through those sections, you'll find other programs that relate specifically to conservation of the Ogallala Aquifer. If you go to page 12, this is the reservoir water supply and sediment management. And if you live in the eastern part of the state, you might say, well, why don't you have a recommendation for that? Well, that's because, thanks to you, we have funding for a pilot project on Tuttle Creek Reservoir. It's called the Water Injection Dredging Project, which is going to kick off in 2024, we hope. And that project hopefully will show us that we can extend the life of our reservoirs. And so there's a project in place, this pilot project, and so we're kind of waiting to see how that turns out. But it is a critical issue for the state of Kansas with the reservoirs, filling in with sediment and causing problems for long-term water planning. So if you turn to page 17, this is the section on water quality initiatives. And so this would help you see what kind of projects there are that are funded by, and I don't know if I said this, but all these projects in this annual report, they're funded by the state water plan. So when we talk about that statutory $8 million, when we talk about the fees that come in, and it totals together about $20 million for the state water plan, and we told you we need $69 million a year, that's to put these projects in place on the ground with landowners for water quality and water quantity projects. So this section is the water quality initiatives section of the annual report, so you can learn about what types of projects we have for that. And then the very last section is on page 24, statewide water issues. So those are bigger issues that, such as Rattlesnake Creek, the R9 Ranch water transfer, Republican River. Many of you probably know about these because they're part of your community, the Missouri River Coordination. And then on the very last page is the drought monitoring and response, which frankly is a often overlooked and really important part of the water office. They monitor the drought that we've been in and elevate that for all of us so that we know what we're dealing with. So that's the annual report. Would you like me to pause and see if there's questions on that? On the report specifically?
That would be
Before I move
fine.
on?
Are there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Ms. Bueller. I was just wondering, you alluded to this a little bit, but could you walk us through exactly how the recommendations are made for the water plan funds every year? You talked about the budget subcommittee, but then, curious to kind of just go through the process with the committee about, how the RIC makes those recommendations, and then how that eventually translates into the budget that we see and hopefully ultimately approve.
So the process is that we want to make sure that we have input from the regional advisory committees. That's important to the process because they've got things that are happening in their, that 14, go back, this group, all across the state. So we need input from them in order to put together the budget. Then there's a budget committee, and the committee has a few water authority members on it, but it also involves all of the agencies. So everyone gets together. I'm not the chair of that committee, but the chair brings us through the process of looking at the budget, and there's a process to go through and make sure that these are performance-based and that everything is looked at to make sure that we make the right recommendations of the things that are important, elevate them to the top between the regional advisory committees and looking at what the agencies need. I mean, I think sometimes it's easy to say, well, what does the water authority think? But I want to know what the agencies think. I mean, they're the ones that are implementing these programs. They know whether or not they have enough staff and what kind of programs need to be implemented now. Sometimes there's cost share or opportunities for money that can be leveraged with state dollars, and sometimes those projects need to rise to the top because you have an opportunity for matching dollars. So I think there are lots of things that are considered through that process, but it includes regional advisory committees, the agencies, and they look at performance-based budget. They have a process that they go through to make sure that the right things are recommended.
Thank you. I always thought it was great how those budget recommendations include local input, expert input, agency input, and then ultimately, you know, we get to weigh in on that budget as well. So I always really thought that process was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you expand just a little bit on the difference between the Regional Advisory Committee and like a GMD and the difference in their roles for that?
So the regional advisory committees are volunteers. They live in the communities, you know, in these areas here. Their job is to elevate the issues that they see in their area and do goals and action plans and bring them to the water authority. So they have the local volunteer effort. They bring it to the water authority volunteer effort advisory, which we then elevate to all of you. The groundwater management districts, there's a Groundwater Management District Act, which I don't know it very well, I will say. That would be, you know, other folks in the room that could answer that. But their job is to conserve or to do projects in their area and to manage groundwater. And so they're very different. They have very different roles. Their boards, I believe, are voted. They vote on their board members, whereas the regional advisory committees are appointed. They get their name elevated to the water authority, and then they get appointed to that role. So it's a very different system. And I think they could complement each other because the regional advisory committees could elevate issues that they see to the groundwater management districts. And in some cases, that probably has happened. But they're very different. They're not the same. One's volunteer, one's, you know, groundwater management district has a director that's paid, and they try to put through programs with local landowners to work on groundwater issues. And that's about as much as I could probably tell you about that. We could ask someone else in the crowd, though.
So in your experience, do they work together? Do they share input?
Some of them do. I think it depends on what part of the state you're in. I think they do talk and collaborate, but I don't know that they meet together. They may have at some time. I'd be interested to know that myself. That would be great. Collaboration, that's the key.
Any other questions? Representative Amex.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Don, it's great to see you.
It's good to see you.
Question on page 16. We're talking about the debt that is currently owed on the reservoirs. Do I understand, and I heard this morning, that if we pay off the balance of the debt as recommended, I think, in the governor's budget, that frees up and we have the authority to make the decisions then on the water, in our reservoirs. How does that change the work that you all do?
That's absolutely correct. That's a really exciting thing to talk about. So everyone in the room knows the issue. I have a note here where I was going to say Governor Kelly, in her budget, recommended the full statutory funding of the $8 million to the state water plan, which we are really grateful for. But she also included $53 million for debt retirement, eliminating 2 remaining reservoir debts related to Milford and Perry reservoirs. This payment would save the state $29.4 million in interest payments, and this payment would pay off the entire remaining reservoir debt for the state of Kansas, and it would lock in control of the water. So right now, because we don't own it, the federal government has control over the water, but if we were to pay off that debt, then we would have control of that water. The other thing is that the money that comes in from the contracts on the water storage, remember I told you about that public water supply group and how they make sure that communities like my rural water district have water, so they have contracts. And they make payments into this water marketing program. So in the case of paying off the reservoir debt, we would still have money coming in on those payments that could then be used to better sustain those reservoirs. So this would be a huge change and a game changer in many cases for that program to be able to put that money back into taking care of those reservoirs. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Follow up, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So then is it safe to say, and just so that my understanding, the money that it frees up, those payments, those interest payments, we can use to pay for our part of the cost of that 69 million or whatever?
I'm going to can I ask Director Owen to clarify that? Would that be okay? Okay,
That'd be very permissible.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Connie Owen, the Director of the Kansas Water Office. And there are options for what the ongoing revenue stream could be used for. So it is part of the water marketing program. So that is designated to the reservoirs and protecting and restoring. So we would hope that that money could go toward keeping the reservoirs viable, because we will still be dealing with increasing sedimentation. It is up to the decisions yet to be made if that revenue is freed up, because right now, with the $80 million in reservoir debt that was paid down last year, that now allows the incoming revenue we have to service the remaining debt. Until last year, there was a huge amount of debt we did not yet have a way to pay for. And thank you very much, that's been solved. So we do have the remaining $53 million in debt. If we pay it all off now, as opposed to making any payments over the next many years, we would save the state $29.4 million. That incoming revenue stream then would logically go toward keeping those reservoirs viable, because we will continue to have issues of sedimentation. So, but those are decisions yet to be made.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On that same line, is there an estimate of what the state's maintenance costs might be on those reservoirs if we take over ownership?
I would be happy to check into that and follow up with that. The operation and maintenance costs that are kicked in when water is called into service, meaning through the water office with the federal government, we contract for storage in the reservoirs. We have those contracts, we ultimately have to pay them all off. That's what this is about. The contracts the water office has with the users, with the cities and industries, that revenue stream, those are all separate contracts as well. When the cities and industries contract with my office to use water, to actually buy water, then operation and maintenance costs kick in that we have to share with the federal government. So paying them off early would not necessarily kick in the operation and maintenance costs early, but I would be happy to follow up and get you more detail on that.
I think that's an issue that we want to study a lot more in the very near future, and I'm hoping for a presentation from the Water Office for more detail on that.
Thank you.
Representative Stocksdale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that was a question I had. Is the federal government doing an adequate job of addressing sedimentation removal in our reservoirs now?
Yes. In a word, yes. We have a very fortunate relationship with the Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that owns these reservoirs. And for example, the water injection dredging pilot project that is now going to be able to go forward on Tuttle Creek Lake is a partnership with the Corps of Engineers. In fact, they suggested it to us years ago, and they've been a real proponent for helping to move that forward. So yes, we deal with the Kansas City Corps of Engineers. We also deal with the Tulsa office Corps of Engineers because Kansas is split between two different regions under the federal government boundaries. But we have a very cooperative, successful partnership with the Corps of Engineers from both offices.
If we take ownership of the reservoirs again, which I think is probably a good idea, and I support the governor's plan for that, would we continue with that partnership with the federal government as far as the dredging goes, or would that be totally on us?
No, that's an ongoing partnership. And if I may, if we pay off the $53 million for Milford and Perry, that doesn't mean we own the reservoir. That means we have control over the storage amount that we have contracted for.
Thank you.
The Corps of Engineers would retain ownership of the flood control portion within each of those reservoirs. Is that correct?
Yes, if you were to cut a reservoir, draw a diagram of it and see it cut along the side, then you would see these different pools that are identified. And of course, in reality, it's not that way, but that's how they divide it up. And so part of the space in the reservoir we've contracted for. There are other areas in that reservoir, other volumes of water that the Corps does retain. Absolutely.
Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Don, for your presentation. And I guess I want to compliment the Water Office and Authority on the Regional Advisory Committee input. I currently serve on the Verdigris, and it seems like I've been there forever. But it is really important to get that grassroots, and it's amazing to me the talent within our advisory committee people around the state that can really provide some input on real water issues. You know, sometimes you tackle things that are crazy. One time we tackled the Highway 400, what we affectionately called the bridge, that was causing a lot of backflow up around between Neodesha and Independence, and contacted KDOT and worked through that. They just basically didn't have a large enough outlet. So they're involved in really a lot more issues locally than what the average person thinks about. So it is a good process, and I think that grassroots input is just critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Blex. And I'll say that I often tell Water Authority members, you are the expert in your community on water. I mean, they know so much about the water issues, and I encourage them to go to the coffee shop and talk about water, because you're the one that knows what the issues are, and you can get support in your local community. Maybe your city or your county can help with some of those issues. So to me, it's a really important, critical part of the water planning process. Yeah.
Any further questions? I might ask one. From your position as the Water Authority Chairman, can you describe the variance and the differences in the water resources across the state of Kansas? You kind of alluded to it earlier. I'm trying to get to the thought that every community is so much different, and that's one of the reasons in '81 we started the Water Authority, to bring in those grassroots people for individual communities to solve their own problems and to bring them to the table and have them discussed and work through issues. I just want you to briefly describe the variability in our water resources across the state.
Well, I'll talk about this from my personal perspective. I mean, in the western part of the state, we rely on groundwater. It's a very arid part of the state. It's in the rain shadow of the Rocky Mountains, and the climate there is very different. About the time you pass Waukene, everything changes, and you have more stream flow you get more rain. So the rain pattern, Brownie showed you that last week, that rain pattern going across the state. And so that's one way in which they're very different. But then you break it down even smaller than that. I live in the Kansas River watershed, and Doug, I think you're in the Neosho. I can't remember which one. Neosho watershed? Which watershed are you in? Verdigris, in Verdigris. The issues between the two parts of the state, even though we both get surface water, are incredibly different. We're dealing with different issues. Where I'm at, the urban area is coming, and it's coming fast. I grew up on a farm in DeSoto. When I was a kid, we had a 2,000-acre vegetable farm. You could see for miles. DeSoto now is going to be the home of Panasonic, my hometown. So things are changing, and so the water issues are changing. The land is changing. We have more impervious surfaces in the Kansas River watershed. We have agriculture still, but it's surrounded by a lot of urban sprawl and growth. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, it's just that it's changing, right? So a lot of these other communities are changing as well, and we have to adapt, and we have to be prepared for all of the changes in our communities and the growth, the population. I mean, some areas in Kansas are growing. I think I saw in the census that Pottawatomie County was the highest growth county in the state. Well, that's what, Wamego? I was like, wow, they're getting a huge population boost, and so they've got to deal with a lot of issues, but one of them is water. They have to make sure that they have enough water. So it's very diverse. And then you get into certain parts like western Kansas, you have 3 groundwater management districts over the Ogallala Aquifer, and they're all different. They're dealing with different issues. They have different rates of decline. And even within those groundwater management districts, there are different rates of decline. Some areas, they've got water. Some areas, they're hurting. And so we need to find a way to make it so that they can be helped. I mean, the bottom line is we want to help people. That's what these recommendations are about. Finding a way to make sure that our neighbors and their children and their grandchildren can continue to live in their communities wherever they're at in Kansas. My son lives in Colby. My grandson's in Colby. I hope that they have enough water to live there as long as they want to. And that's what we should aspire to, is to make sure that all of these communities have what they need. Bless you. Would you like me to finish the presentation piece? There's a couple more slides.
That would be fine.
Okay. I do want to make sure that I give you a hearty, hearty, hearty thank you for full restoration of the $8 million last year. The $80 million that paid off the water supply storage debt at Hillsdale Lake, Clinton Lake, and Big Hill Lake. Director Owen talked about those payments. And then also the early debt retirement of the John Redmond Reservoir dredging bond. So thank you very much. This goes a long way to help us make progress. So talk a little bit about funding this year. Right now, we're having the legislative day. I know you guys get flooded with folks with their legislative days, but the Water Authority and Regional Advisory Committees are here today. They're all right behind me. I know they're all sitting there. Turn around and see them. And they're here today to talk about the water issues and to answer your questions. So if you have the opportunity to talk with any of them, I really encourage you to do so. You can really learn about the issues that are impacting them in their local communities. So we talked about the current revenue of the state water plan is not sufficient to meet all the current program needs. So that goes back to this document where we say 69 million. I did already talk about the state appropriations to leverage funding. I forgot that these slides were on here, and I went right through the annual report. So this really just repeats. So these are the recommendations for state policy, and what we wanted to show you here was how the Water Authority got to what's on page 3. Page 3 are the recommendations to the governor and the legislature. Because the statute says that's what we're supposed to do. So we wanted to make sure that we made a recommendation. So the issues were identified by the public, the Regional Advisory Committee, agencies, and other partners. I told you about the water policy conversation we had in the summer. Then we had the Kansas Water Plan update in August. And the Ogallala Committee met. Then the Water Authority discussed and approved the recommendations to be included in the annual report. I did go over our recommendations, the critical depletion of the Ogallala Aquifer. Again, these are on page 3. A few more things that I wanted to mention. I did say that our Regional Advisory Committee and Water Authority members are here today. Also, I want to mention, I want to thank you for recognizing the importance of water, demonstrating a commitment to water funding, and the State Water Plan funds programs across the state to meet the goals. Thank you to all of you for highlighting these issues. So that's the end of my formal presentation, but I'd stand for questions if you have questions about the Water Authority and how we're structured, or the regional advisory committees, or anything in the annual report. Be happy to talk about those.
Representative Vaughn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks again, Don. I know you are in the early stages of this, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the next steps for the collaborative process going into the policy recommendation to in the decline of the Ogallala Aquifer. Do you have any thoughts on what next steps might include?
Well, this recommendation, the part of the second, number 2, and all of number 3, these are actually in the State Water Plan. They're written in there. The Ogallala Committee was written into the State Water Plan. So we're already starting to execute that document, and there are a lot of things that we have to implement. In terms of what are the next steps, that'll be up to the full Water Authority if there are any next steps. Right now, we're making this recommendation to the governor and the legislature, and I'd really like to see what you all think. What do you think are the next steps? What things rise to the top for you? Our real goal in writing this was to make sure it was a conversation and that we don't stop talking about it. When the House Bill 2686 didn't go anywhere last year, we said, we can't just sit here and do nothing, right? We need to elevate these things and keep the conversation moving. So our goal was to continue to have a space where the conversation can continue, and that we can keep elevating it as the advisory and volunteer piece of the water planning process. So when I stand here today, I really am speaking for all of those regional advisory committee members and all of the Water Authority members who think that this is critical. This is our number 1 issue, is the Ogallala Aquifer and the funding piece. So I know it's not an answer, but I think that it's thoughtful. It needs to be thoughtful. It needs to include everyone. It needs to include the local folks. And I'm not sure what the next step will be, but I want to see what you all think. So.
Yeah, thank you. I asked just because I want to be supportive of the process. I think doing it collaboratively and continuing to push the issue forward is something we all want. And I know KWA is independent of the legislature, but if there's any way our committee can be supportive, I think that's something we would all be in favor of. Thank you.
Representative Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Don. Is it your opinion that there are enough statutory tools on the books already to deal with the Ogallala decline, or are you expecting us to go into an area where additional legislative tools would be needed?
I think that, I don't know that I would consider myself knowledgeable enough to say whether or not we need more tools, but I will tell you that the experts that I'm surrounded by on the Water Authority say that we have adequate tools. We have the water conservation areas, we have the LEMAs, we have the AGUCA, but I'll be honest with you, I don't really know if we have enough tools. I'm hoping that you and your fellow committee members can think about that and give it some really good thought, and maybe, you guys have some ideas.
Any further questions? Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say thank you. I've been able to attend some of the Water Authority meetings over the summer and fall, and they really do great, great work. If you ever get the opportunity to attend, you should. Great discussion. It's just been a wonderful experience, so thank you.
Thank you for coming to the meetings, and Chair, you as well. We appreciate having your presence there. Before I wind down, I just want to say that on our recommendation, I think it's really, really important that we talk about the formal collaborative process. Whatever happens there, it has to happen with the folks that live there. They have to be a driver, and we want to help people. I think that's the bottom line. It's called help. How do we make sure that we help people if we can? There are some tools that we show under Ogallala Aquifer in here, and one of those is water conservation areas. You know, how do we make sure that folks know that these tools are available and that they can use them and that they have some power over their destiny to conserve water? So I think it's really important to have a lot of good outreach in the areas where we have the highest decline. And some of those initiatives are in the state water plan budget. There's a big portion in here for outreach, trying to make sure that folks in communities that are having big declines know that these programs exist and can take advantage of them and maybe help them make some progress.
Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One follow-up question I did want to ask, as we discuss the need for more funding and looking at how can we create a sustainable funding mechanism for water programs and projects, is there anything, and sorry to put you on the spot here, but anything that rises to the top in terms of a program that's been chronically underfunded or things that you think of right now that really need those additional funds, either for matching grants or because we haven't really been putting enough money into the water plan, anything like that that you might want to highlight for us as we think about this going forward?
Well, I'll repeat what I hear from within all of the agencies. There's not enough state money to match to leverage federal funding. That's probably one of the biggest problems. And we see it time and time again. I work for a nonprofit. Nonprofits can also get funds and use those for programs, and we can leverage them with match. The state doesn't have the ability to do that right now because there's not enough money. And so, you know, you look at other states that are getting tons of money into their state for different projects, and we can't compete because we can't put the match forward. So that's probably what I hear is one of the biggest problems, is the ability to leverage state dollars for federal funds.
Let me ask a question. If you had more available funds, where can we put that? If we currently have WCA's, LEMA's, MIFA's tools out there, where can we put our invested funds for the best outcome to communicate to all the producers and GMDs and everywhere else? Adoption of some of these tools can help us save some of the levels there in the Ogallala Aquifer. Do you have any recommendations where we could communicate with people the best?
Well, I'm going to direct you first to page 4 of the annual report. The agencies broke down the $69 million into different buckets, and there is money there for the High Plains Aquifer, data collection, research, modeling, irrigation, water technology, and water right purchase, which is to retire water rights. So that section there, I'm going to, do you mind if I ask Director Owen if she has anything to add? Do you have anything to add? Okay, good. What's that? The WISE program. It's in here, right, Connie? It's the, yes.
To help enable leveraging these funds in a way that hasn't been available before, in the Water Authority's recommendations for expenditures, which is on page 6, One of the line items is High Plains Aquifer Partnerships. And that incorporates our previous and current and ongoing Water Tech Farm program, as well as what is an expansion and transition of those concepts to a variety of water users. The Water Office does have the new WISE program, Water Innovation Systems Education Strategy. So that is all about adoption, implementation, and education. So this line item encompasses and envisions allowing for a mechanism within the State Water Plan Fund that we could timely leverage money. The way the state budgeting system is now, the process is, we can't leverage federal funds, private funds, because we're on too long a timeline. We have to start working a year and a half, almost 2 years out on our next budget request. So we cannot possibly currently access a lot of cost share programs because their timelines are much shorter. So one thing with the approval of the Water Authority, we designed, as I said, a modification of this line item for State Water Plan Fund expenditures this year to allow for that. We also have a companion line item for water quality initiatives, same concept. So we're continuing some programs that we've already been paying for, but it expands them to allow for addressing more issues and being able to provide some cost share in a timely way. So it doesn't get us as much money as we would need, but it's definitely a first step, and it would be the first time that we would actually have the ability to act in a more nimble and agile way. Does that help answer?
Yes. I would ask that we elicit collaboration from all the different agencies, Andy Lyons Conservation Districts, Kansas State University Research and Extension. There are many things out there, and I believe that if many of us are on the same message and we're working forward towards some of these things, we'll get there far faster.
Well, and to echo and support that, thank you very much. You'll notice on this chart of the State Water Plan funds that there are a number of different agencies here. So the Department of Agriculture, Andy Lyons Division of Conservation, and Earl's Division of Water Resources. We have the Kansas Department of Health and Environment and the Water Office, and even some Wildlife and Parks and Geological Survey. The State Water Plan Fund goes to programs and efforts that all of these agencies actually implement, because these are the experts, these are the folks that make these things happen. So the State Water Plan Fund doesn't just come to the Water Office, it supports all these different agencies, which is exactly what Representative Minix was talking about.
Thank you, Connie.
Just a comment, Representative Titus asked if there's need for more statutory things. As I sit here, I think we're in very good shape concerning quantity. And yet I can see as we become more active on water issues here in the state of Kansas, the potential need for more statutes concerning quality of water, which we need to address as we're seeing more problems crop up across the state. I want to thank the Kansas Water Authority, their members, and the Regional Advisory Committee members for their participation in this process and all their efforts and what they've done for the state of Kansas. Could you make sure that the members of this committee receive your meeting dates? And I would encourage members of this committee to attend Kansas Water Authority meetings and watch the process and listen. It's very beneficial, I believe.
Our next meeting is tomorrow, and it's here in Topeka, 9:30. I don't even know, 9:30 a.m. at the library, Shawnee County, Topeka Library. Yeah, here in town, if you'd like to hop over.
Thank you. Any further questions? Any announcements? Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Cyward, I'm sorry. You sure?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Any announcements? Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the committee, we were invited to tour Water One this year. We're going to do that on Friday, February 17th. At 9 a.m., I will be emailing, or they will be emailing some details. We're going to tour a couple of facilities, and they're going to treat us to lunch. So save that date for you. Thank you.
Anything further for the committee? Then we are adjourned. Thank